Welcome to episode 86 of the GT on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics now in about 20 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend. Joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel. And once again, we welcome Diana from Fierce Wireless to the conversation. So let's get started with my first topic. Actually, today, Oracle and Telefonica announced an expansion of their partnership for cloud service delivery. And I recently was briefed by Oracle on its OCI, its Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Platform. And my question to the two of you is, could this be the best kept secret relative to AWS and Azure for operators? My conclusion is quite possibly. What I like about Oracle's focus is within telco, they're focused on IT services, network enablement, and enterprise services. And the latter obviously will be very important with respect to private cellular network deployments and that sort of thing. So we've talked about Telefonica Tech in the past. They have a very broad portfolio. They deliver a lot of managed infrastructure as a service offerings, as well as cloud services. So I really view OCI as a nice extension to what they're already doing. I'm assuming that Telefonica has probably been working with the other public cloud providers. And so what I'll also mention as well is that Telefonica will be hosting Oracle's first POP within Spain, which I find unusual. I figured Oracle was already hosting in Spain, but this expands their footprint with Telefonica. So from my perspective, it's quite compelling. And I'm wondering, Anshel, what are your thoughts?
I think that Oracle has definitely, I would say, woken up in the telecom space. I think that we're also kind of lagging on the cloud infrastructure side as well, and they've been catching up. And I think that they've done a much better job of being somewhat competitive with AWS and Azure. But the reality is their market share is still fairly low. And I think that if you look at where they are today, there's obviously tons of room to grow. And I think the key is going to be offering differentiated services. And I think that that's probably going to be where they grow the most, because Azure and AWS already have such a large install base and so many partnerships in place already that I think the only way that they can really compete with that is by offering something different.
I agree. The enterprise service thing will be key for them. If you think about Oracle and other parts of the enterprise, they likely have a position with their historic database products. And so they have a nice route to market. But Diana, before we go to your first topic this week, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think you guys covered most of it. I mean, enterprise, of course, is going to be key. And to Anshel's point, Oracle, yeah, they might have woken up to the telco opportunity, but they have a long way to go to catch up. I think, I know we're in Q4 now, but in Q3, I mean, Oracle only had like 2% of the overall cloud market or something tiny like that. So,
Right.
And that compares to when, Amazon's at 30% and Microsoft is, up near 20%. It's going to be hard for them, I think, maybe to make a name for themselves in the same way. But this for sure shows that they're at least making the effort there. Absolutely.
Well, great, Diana. So your first topic is around 6G and an alliance.
Yeah, so the ATIS Next G Alliance has been talking for a little while about 6G, and they just came out with their 6G roadmap. And this kind of detailed 6 goals that are going to be their top priorities. I should say they're kind of focused on North America.
Right.
So their top priorities include advancing trust, security and resilience, enhancing the digital world experience, helping kind of implement cost efficiencies across network architecture, distributed cloud communication systems, future AI native networks, and sustainability. And all of that is basically a rundown of all the buzzwords we hear now, which I find kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But they also kind of laid out the need to get the government involved in this already. And I think, this is just kind of my own speculation, but part of that is probably making sure everybody's aligned on spectrum, making sure everybody's got the same rules so that we don't run into the thing that we've run into with 5G, where everybody else has mid-band spectrum and the US had to play catch up. So I think it's interesting that they're kind of pushing on this already. It seems natural because these kind of G development cycles, if you will, kind of, are 10 years plus.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's kind of hard for me to take it super seriously, because a lot of the stuff that, has been promised in 5G, we're still waiting on. So I don't know, Will, what do you make of this?
I just, it's early, and, I applaud alliances like this one, and there are a number of others that I follow as well that are trying to get in front of this. You bring up the spectrum point, which is interesting. This is going to be terahertz, and certainly at the upper end of the spectrum bands. And it'll be interesting. I think it's too soon to call anything, but certainly I think some of the work that's being done around millimeter wave, Qualcomm in particular, to improve propagation, I think could lend itself really well. I don't know. What do you think, Anshel?
I have a lot of thoughts, unfortunately. So on the first point, I do think the spectrum discussion is an important one. To your point that the incumbents need to be identified first, and then, with proper government action moved preemptively, so that clearing is not an issue. So the spectrum that will be needed can be utilized. That said, I think we're a long ways away from figuring out terahertz in a mobile form factor. We're still struggling with millimeter wave. So terahertz would be an even smaller phased array of antennas. Theoretically, that would allow for a smaller, potentially 5 different arrays rather than 2 or 3, and they could be much smaller. Maybe, possibly, I don't know. But I will say that this conversation and talking about the fact that 6G discussions might be too early, I think are somewhat justified. But I will also say that I remember going and experiencing some of the early 5G technologies deep inside Qualcomm labs in 2015, roughly 5 or 6 years after the introduction of 4G LTE. So I don't actually think we're too far away. We're only a couple years away, I believe, from seeing some early implementations of 6G. And to the point around terahertz and antennas and whether or not it'll be a mobile product, I believe that it's a possibility that we could actually see the 6G not introducing a new spectrum, like 4G didn't really introduce any new spectrum, and rather being the G that actually delivers what the promises of the previous G were, right? 3G didn't really fully deliver on its promises. 4G kind of did. And then, 5G might not deliver on all of its promises, and 6G might actually be what does it. So I have a feeling that the line between 5G and 6G is going to be a lot blurrier. And I'm not sure we'll actually get terahertz in 6G because I'm not really sure we need it. And I think that the challenges of terahertz might actually be greater than we anticipate.
Are you saying 6G is the new 5G?
That's what it sounded like to me.
If you look at the roadmap and you look at what's happening in release 18, it looks like it's a very slow climb. I think the difference between 4G and 5G was so drastic that I think that the difference between 5G and 6G will actually be fairly minute, because we're already talking about AI in networks, right? And to your point, all the buzzwords we're using today for 5G are basically already in this. So I think that when you look at what's possible, what's probable, and what's likely, I think it's very likely that 6G is going to be a step change from 5G.
Well, you've got your own topic to cover now, right?
I do.
Yeah, let's
So,
get back to 5G.
Speaking of 5G, Samsung introduced the new Galaxy S22 line, as well as the Tab S8 line. And these are the newest phones and tablets from Samsung. They are based on Samsung's 4-nanometer SoC and Qualcomm's 4-nanometer SoC. Samsung did a great job of talking about their own phones and their own chips, neglecting to mention that Snapdragon is taking an increasing share of their devices this year. And it was really funny when they announced the tablet, they said it was a 4-nanometer processor and didn't name it, but in the background there was a big Snapdragon logo. I'm like, you can show it, but you can't say it. Anyways, the good thing is that these devices, I think, are probably going to look and feel fairly similar to last year's models. There will be upgrades in a lot of ways, including the modem. We'll be getting a Snapdragon X65, so it's going to be able to do all kinds of carrier aggregation that we're going to start seeing this year. But I think the real big kahuna is the S22 Ultra, which is actually what a lot of people believe is just a Note 21 Ultra, kind of reshapen into an S22 Ultra, because it looks like a Note and it's got an S Pen built in now. So I think that the Note line has somehow attached itself to the S line, and now they are one, with the Ultra being the Note device. And yeah, I think it's going to be very exciting to see what improvements occur. I'm waiting on my device. I did not catch the first wave with all the press, but I will be getting one fairly soon. And I'm excited to see what the network performance will be like, as well as the camera. But I'm mostly interested in network because the camera hardware is mostly the same. And the reality is that the S21, which I still have today, which is a miracle because I usually switch phones every 3 months, this thing really lasted me like a full year. And there wasn't really a phone that had better network performance, better camera performance. So I think Samsung did a great job with S21 Ultra, and we'll see what they can do with the S22.
Cool. I know I got news from both T-Mobile and AT&T that they're being very aggressive on.
I forgot about the carrier deals. Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
All the carrier deals are basically the same. I'm pretty sure some of them are subsidized by Samsung. For example, if you pre-order before the 25th, you get double the storage capacity of the model you order. I think that exists for every model except for like the top end, obviously, because there isn't a higher end capacity available. And then there's also, Samsung's giving some like $200 if you order from their website. Most of the operators are offering $1,000 with trade-in towards any Samsung Galaxy S22 device. The reason why is because the Ultra is $1,200, so you'll still probably end up having to pay $200 if you trade in. The caveat is that most of the carriers are requiring you to do this for a premium plan, so you have to have their top plan to get that $1,000. AT&T's is a little bit more differentiated in that the first two phones, regardless of what kind of plan you have, you trade it in, they'll give you enough money to get a new phone. And then I think they're only giving you $800 towards, regardless of what plan you have. So they have a slightly differentiated plan there, but overall they're pretty much the same otherwise. And I think a lot of people are going to switch. If you have an S21, it's unlikely you're going to switch unless you're a person like me who switches constantly. But if you had an S10 or older, it's time to switch. It's got everything you would need. And if you really like productivity and having an S10, I think a lot of people have been waiting for an updated version of the Note. And I think this is going to be the one to upgrade to, at least the Ultra. Oh yeah, and prices are $800, $1,000, and $1,200, starting with the S22, the Plus, and the Ultra.
Well, I'll take your hand-me-down, buddy, when you get the new one. Diana, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. Well, he made me anxious when he said he switches phones every 3 months. I was like, oh God.
He gets all the cool gadgets. I just get all the boring infrastructure stuff.
Oh gosh. Okay. So I guess the only thing I would add is that to your point about them all requiring people to kind of jump on those upper tiers, that's something we've heard all the carriers kind of talk about as a way to kind of increase ARPU. They're trying to progressively step up all the customers up their unlimited tiers, which is funny because I remember back when unlimited was introduced, I think what T-Mobile did that was their only plan, and now there are tiers again. It's funny the way that worked out. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how much this pays off in terms of functioning as a mechanism of being able to step people up. I don't know how many people, maybe you guys have better insight into how many people actually are Samsung users versus, I think AT&T has a stronger iPhone base.
Yeah, it depends. Like every carrier is different. I know T-Mobile is more Samsung heavy, or at least they were. And I know AT&T is more iPhone heavy, which obviously they were the first carrier to take iPhones. And Verizon is kind of all over the place, but that's because they've been invested in being a lead Android manufacturer, even though they have tons of iPhone users. So I think Verizon is probably the most diverse. But the reality is that I think competition is good for the carriers, because then the devices and the OEMs are going to be more willing to do these promotions. And when there's promotions, people are more willing to get new phones and upgrade to new plans.
Yeah. The only other thing I'd mention is the EIPs have kind of bounced back and forth between, shorter 24 months, and now they're back up to 3 years.
Yep.
So it looks like they are desperately trying to hold people on their networks. Again, we'll have to just kind of wait and see how effective this is.
Which is really funny, because when they're trying to poach each other's customers, now they're offering more money to let you leave your carrier. So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Crazy.
That's all I've got though on this. So
cool.
I think it's back to Will, right?
Back to me. I'll talk about my second and final topic for this week. So I want to provide an update on the rip and replace activity. So, and Anshel and I, we've been talking about this for a while, but the Secure and Trusted Communication Network Act of 2019 established about $1 billion. And at that time, Anshel and I said, oh, that's not enough, guys. So they ended up doubling it to almost 1.9, almost 2 billion. But here's the latest. So the tally came in, the request, and these again are mainly focused in rural America, where Huawei and ZTE have had a foothold when you look at 3G and 4G. But the request that came in total 5.6 billion. Not surprising. So now the FCC is going to have to deal with that. But, and just to kind of run through the requirements here, the program's designed to reimburse carriers with 10 million or fewer customers for the cost of removal, replacement, and disposal of this equipment. And so this is not surprising to me. Anshel and I called it, a few years ago that it was going to require a lot more. I expect this number is going to go up even further. And so the question that I've got, what's the impact on 5G deployments? Because we're talking about a lot of LTE infrastructure, right? And then how does this all affect the digital divide? And Anshel, let me throw it to you. Would love to get your input.
Well, I'm not going to beat my chest, because you and I were both right about this. I think anybody who knew, the scale of this problem understood that the amount of money set aside was not enough. I think you and I ballparked it around 9 or 10 billion.
We did,
when we last talked about it, and I think that's probably what it's going to end up being when all is said and done. But yeah, I mean, this is a complicated issue that no one really wants to pay for, because it doesn't affect that many people, and there's not that much money to be made in solving this problem. So I think this has to be something that the senators from these states need to push Congress on. The whole point of having senators is to balance the least populous states with the more populated states, and potentially deal with these kinds of rural problems. I think that there can be some mitigation of costs with technologies like ORAN. And I think this is an opportunity to try and cut costs in that area. especially since there's not that much equipment deployed in these areas compared to more urban and suburban areas. So you can build out potentially a greenfield deployment, even if it's not really greenfield at this point. I think there's an opportunity for ORAN if it's ready. Diana, do you have any input?
You know, I don't know if you, I'm fidgeting because I'm buzzing. I'm going to geek out for a second, but first of all, I have to say, when you just said, if it's ready, that's doing a lot of heavy lifting in your sentence. You know, that's the key caveat. Couple things on this. So when the FCC came up with its original 1.9, well, the secondary 1.9 billion, I think that they came to that number after, you know, surveying the operators, but that survey only got responses from like 50 people. And the FCC just said that they got applications from 181, I think it was.
I think you're right.
That's a huge difference. And part of the difference is because they went from originally saying that they were only going to give money to people with 2 million customers or less, to then what you said, Will, it's 10 million or less. So they kind of moved the goalposts, and you know, they just released a public notice, I think yesterday or the day before, saying, you know, kind of attributing the disparity in the estimate and what the actual came in to that shifting goalpost. Couple other interesting things. A Windstream representative actually told me that their cost estimate is higher than they think the actual costs are going to be. And they told me that's because they had to submit estimated costs based on an FCC cost catalog. And he said, you know, we don't really think it's going to cost that much, but we had to use the numbers the FCC gave us for costs of certain equipment. So it's not clear to me that 5.6 billion is going to be the actual number that it costs. And remember, the FCC isn't going to be reimbursing based on the estimates. They're going to be reimbursing based on actual costs. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out is that the FCC does actually have a procedure that they have to follow if there's not enough funding to go around. And under the law, top priority is going to be given to service providers with 2 million customers or less. So that means any of the larger operators are going to get squeezed out. And then after that, the so-called second priority people are going to be advanced communication service providers that are accredited public or private non-commercial educational institutions, as well as healthcare providers and libraries. And then anything that's left over kind of gets divvied up among everybody else who applied. But the takeaway there for me is that some of the bigger operators might kind of get short shrift here.
Yeah. Diana, that's great insight baseball to share on the podcast. And I gotta go back and point out the fact that the FCC collected 82 billion plus with C-band. And if they need to like dip into the kitty to pay for some altimeters with the whole FAA debacle, they might want to kick in a little bit here. You know, the digital divide is real. Rural, you know, connectivity is lacking. And you know, it's that's beyond just the whole rip and replace notion with the Chinese infrastructure, but it's going to have to be taken care of at some point. But again, great insight, Diana. But let's go to your second topic this week, and you want to talk about Red Hat 5G service assurance.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump into this saying I've never actually heard this company's name said aloud, so I'm just going to go for it. EXFO.
Yeah.
EXFO?
EXFO?
Yeah, I don't know. They teamed up with Red Hat to make their service assurance solution available as a Red Hat container. And the idea behind this is to kind of give operators who are putting more of their 5G functions in the cloud visibility all the way across their mobile network environments. So that includes, you know, edge to core to cloud. They said that a tier 1 North American operator is already using this, but they didn't say who, which I find interesting. You know, I have a couple thoughts, speculations, but I'm going to kind of keep those to myself because I really don't know. And I don't want to, you know, put my foot in my mouth here. But yeah, when they put out this announcement, they noticed that almost 2/3 of network issues are coming from virtualized cloud infrastructure. So this is going to be really important as more people are kind of moving operations to the cloud. You know, we heard, I think it was last year, AT&T said they're going to put their whole core in the cloud.
Right.
So I think this kind of flew under the radar a bit in terms of how much people paid attention to this announcement. But I think the topic more generally of service assurance for cloud environments all the way through the rest of the network is going to be increasingly important as we move forward. Do you guys have anything to add?
I'll just add that I've written on a number of topics related to networking assurance, and it's mission critical. So this is it's going to become more and more important, to your point, Diana, that these cloud infrastructure providers provide a very robust assurance and an orchestration platform. Anshel, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I'm not the expert in what is it, network service assurance in the cloud.
Right.
I'm not that guy, as you well know. But I understand what's necessary for different ISVs and application developers to have consistency when they're running their apps across different operators' clouds. There's just going to have to be a lot of software running to ensure that the experience is consistent and reliable. And I have a feeling that you're going to see a lot more of these kinds of services being deployed to ensure that there's consistency across the cloud, both horizontally and vertically. And it's only going to get more complicated as we have a mixture of ORAN and legacy. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah, I mean, no, cloudification, all the disaggregation is introducing complexities. Absolutely, totally agree with you, buddy. But let's hit your second and final topic this week. And we talked about this last week, the whole Nvidia ARM deal being off, but you want to provide an update.
Yes, so it is officially off. SoftBank has announced that Nvidia will no longer be acquiring ARM. This is obviously relevant because ARM is a big supplier of IP to most of the industry, both on the smartphone side and on the network infrastructure side. So it's relevant to 5G on both ends. And the company ARM itself will be having an IPO, and it has a new CEO, Rene Haas, who ironically came to ARM a few years ago from Nvidia. And he is now CEO, replacing Simon. Both guys are great. I know Simon as well as Rene, and Rene is honestly a good replacement for Simon. One, because naturally he's been reporting to Simon for quite some time, but also has a lot of just experience in the semi industry, and he's like a great speaker, and I think he's very personable. So I think it's a good thing for ARM, and also ARM is projecting to have its best quarter ever. So they're going to be reporting earnings before their IPO that make their IPO look pretty good, in the sense that they're 2021 is probably going to be their best year ever. And that's a great position to be in if you want to IPO, when you consider that I don't really think there is a company that could have acquired ARM. I think the only solution other than an IPO would have been some kind of consortium of all the cloud vendors or all the semiconductor manufacturers, because ARM supplies everybody, including Intel and AMD. So, it's just something you can't avoid. And I think they have to remain neutral. And I think they can be profitable as a public company, as they were many years ago before SoftBank took them private.
My only observation is, oftentimes it takes a different CEO to take a company public than to manage a merger. And you're very, very close to these players, Anshel, like more so than I am. But, based on, the research that I've done on his resume and his background, I think he's a great fit. And I think ARM can move beyond this, and it'll be interesting to see earnings when they're reported. What do you think, Diana?
I don't have too much to add. This isn't really my area of expertise. I'm definitely going to leave it to you guys because you know better than I do. The only question I have is whether there's any read through from the fact that this kind of transaction fell through to any of the other deals that are on the table. I know Microsoft announced some. So do you think there's going to be any sort of connection there in terms of what can and can't get done?
I think regulatory scrutiny is going to be tighter than it's ever been, especially for as long as this administration is in control of the FTC. Ultimately, the FTC is what killed this. And, Microsoft is very clearly trying to appease the FTC as they try to close their deal with Activision. I think AMD today announced that their acquisition of Xilinx has gotten all the approvals it needs. So I don't think that's in jeopardy anymore. But I think mergers are always going to be something that are going to be more scrutinized than they ever have been. And I think that includes the acquisitions that Meta has made in the last few years. And there are multiple ongoing investigations about that. So we'll see what happens. But I think you're right. There are some implications. I think this was a unique situation because this was a supplier being purchased by a customer effectively. And that generally doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, good point. Well, it's been another great podcast. Diana, thanks for joining. Anshel, why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights for a future podcast or a specific topic, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech. I'm at Anshel Sog, and Diana is at Dia Marie's Beat. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.